So this says, welcome to Hu Chin. Hu Chin is the territory that you guys are now in. So most of the times when we come to places, we think of Oakland or San Leandro or Berkeley or Alameda, all these different names that were given to these places long after my ancestors had been here for thousands of years. And so when I come and I do talks, I'd like to ground people in where they're at. Before I do that, I wanted to offer a real big gratitude to the organizing entities that brought us together today to do this talk. I think it's important for us to come together in one mind so that we can begin to unravel some of the craziness that's going on, but also to know that we're not alone. I think that that's one of the key issues in organizing anywhere, but especially right now when we're dealing with climate disaster, that sometimes we can find ourselves wrapped up in our heads and feel like we're all alone. And so it's good to be in community with folks, to know that we are not facing this by ourselves, and to not isolate ourselves around those kinds of things, right? So I'm really happy to be here, to be a part of this. So you're in one of the traditional territories of the Lishan Ohlone people. And my ancestors have been here since the beginning of time. Hu Chin, the territory, actually encompasses 6 Bay Area cities. So Oakland, Emeryville, Alameda, Berkeley, Albany, and Piedmont. There we go, we got 6 of them. I had to add Piedmont because they decided they were a city. So I'm going to take you guys on a little journey that's a little rough. Because my journey begins as an Ohlone woman in my territory who has never been taken away from my lands, but find myself homeless in my own territories sometimes. And this comes with a history that's never taught about. Even though we have history teachers and our kids go to school and we're talking about education, most of the time my people are talked about in the past. We're talked about like this. In 4th grade, most people learn about us in the Bay Area in 4th grade curriculum, that the Ohlone people were here and they were found bouncing around, I guess, I don't know, wandering, was in somebody's diary. And for thousands of years, I often wonder what were my ancestors doing when these people walked up to us and found us wandering about. But for thousands of years, my ancestors have had this tie, and there's been an unbroken tie to this land. We're taught in the past, and so in a lot of ways, this creates a genocide of my people, right? And genocide is a huge word. We're looking at a whole bunch of sides right now as this climate disaster is happening. We're looking at ecocides that are happening. We're looking at a bunch of different things. But it's important to know that my ancestors are still here, that the Ohlone people are still here, and that we've not gone away. And that we continue to be here caretaking our sacred places and our sacred lands and our sacred waters in quiet ways that most people don't understand. So most people think of Ohlone people as one people. And that's because there was some Spaniards that got here. And they decided that all of us kind of lived on the coast and we ate the same kind of foods and we looked kind of the same. And so we are all Coastanoan. But there are actually 8 different nations of Ohlone people with 8 different creation stories and 8 different languages, and our songs and our dances are different. Our territories are different. The Lishan people are one of 4 people in the East Bay, and I happen to be the spokesperson for one of those tribes. So my ancestors have always been here, but we're taught about real simply. We ate acorns, and we went fishing, and we helped these nice padres come and build these churches. And we lived in villages along the bay. And I don't know, but for some reason when I talk to people in the Bay Area, they seem to think that we were stagnant. that we had a village here, and that was the only place we lived at. When I do work around saving sacred sites, it's like this one little tiny place where we never left. As human beings, we know that we travel and move all over the place. And actually, not that long ago, there were such things as called protocols, and I really appreciate my young sister talking about what protocols were with the Hawaiian people. But there was protocol here in the Bay Area not that long ago. A few hundred years ago, if you can imagine, people had territorial boundaries between particular creeks and waterways and mountains. And the people that came there had to stop because they knew that wasn't their particular place that they were supposed to take care of. And they would send up a smoke fire, and they would wait until someone came to get them. And while people came to get them, there were people in the villages that were close by getting together food and gifts to give them. And they would be brought to the village and they would be celebrated. And they would have gambling games and prayer and songs and dance and food. And all of this would occur before that person was even asked why they're in that territory. And they may have come to that territory to gather food or medicine, to visit relatives, to cross to the other side. But it was a time to stop and remember that there are actually others that are taking care of that land, have put down the proper prayers for that place, have a relation to the land itself. And you honored that by stopping. Today, many of us cross probably many different territorial boundaries without stopping or thinking or praying to those people, for those ancestors that have been there for thousands of years, for taking care of that land. So traditional territory is important for us to remember as we go along, because when you're not Ohlone and you live in the Bay Area, then you're a guest. When I talk to fourth graders, I said, what do guests do? What do you do as a guest when you go over to your friend's house? And they'll say, well, you don't break things, right? You don't argue with them. You're in your best behavior. You ask for permission. You don't touch things that don't belong to you. Basic manners that we teach our children. But then we don't take it to the next step. As guests on someone else's lands, how do we behave ourselves? Anywhere you step on what is now called the United States is stolen indigenous land. And so I think that we don't think about that very often. The missionaries came with the Spanish soldiers, and this is a part of the history that I hold that is still very rough inside of me. Coming to Bishop O'Dowd and Catholic school and wondering if folks had even thought about knowing the real history of what happened to my people. We're often taught that the Spaniards came with these ideas of missions, and the missions were a great thing because they brought an idea of how to farm and how to take care of land and how to, because of course the indigenous people of this land had no idea how to do that. And it's very important for us to realize that that came through an institution, the institution of Catholicism with the doctrine of discovery, right? When I talk to little guys, I say, oh, imagine this, right? This is the coast of California where all the missions were, right? Again, we give you a preview of history if you guys forgot about it back in fourth grade, because we're disappeared after that. But imagine in 1547, this Spanish ship is floating on alongside of the coast of California. Who knows what calling dibs is? You guys know what calling dibs is? Yeah, I had a pink box, right? And I had one, what? What would be in the pink box? Huh? Donut, see? Everybody knows what a pink box is, right? All right. If I had one donut left in my pink box and you called dibs, that means what? You get it, right? So imagine in 1547, the Spanish ship is floating along the coast of California and calls dibs on this land for Spain and the church. That's how they got the land. Calling dibs, without talking to the people, without really knowing what was there, they called dibs on this land, and it became the property of Spain. And then they forgot about it for a while, right? And Russia was working with native people in Northern California, and they were doing fur trade up there, and Spain got freaked out about Russia coming down and getting the land that they called dibs on. So what they decided to do was to create these mission systems that they had already used on the people of what's now Mexico. And it worked really well for holding down land. And so they decided to create these missions. And so what I tell young people is that they didn't actually come with enough people to build these missions. They had this idea of missions. And so what I call the first prison industrial complex of California, my ancestors and California Indian people from the bottom of California to a little bit past here were forced to build their own prisons. And then they weren't allowed to leave. And my ancestors and California Native people died by the thousands. And they died because of malnutrition, because the foods that they received in the missions was less than the food quantity that people were getting in Auschwitz. They died because they were worked to death. They died because they were murdered and beaten. They died of heartbreak. To imagine that my ancestors died of heartbreak on their own lands. So the mission weren't too long. My ancestors were directly enslaved at Mission San Jose and Fremont, and Mission Dolores in San Francisco. The Catholic priests kept really good notes so we can actually prove all the way back to first contact where we were, our village sites, where we had been taken to, when we were baptized, who we were forced to marry, who our children were, and when we died. I could prove that all the way back to the first contact, and yet the federal government does not see me as an indigenous person. Almost every native person along the coast of California that was missionized does not have federal recognition. And so we stand here and visualize it's another form of genocide, wiping away of a whole people. And yet you all probably know that we still exist, right? I'm not a figment of your imagination this morning. I'm still here. I got kids and grandkids. Mission system lasted for about 99 years. Not that long. Long enough to totally devastate the whole population of people. But then Mexico decided that they wanted the land, and Spain had too much land. The churches had too much land. And they gave away these huge land grants. People named Vallejo and Peralta and Bernal received these huge land grants, and my ancestors went from being slaves at these missions to being slaves at these ranches. My ancestors survived, my family survived by pretending to be Mexican and speaking Spanish and working on these ranches until it was safe to come out and talk about it again. And the reason is for the third stolen lands, right? United States came here. They decided that they wanted this land, and so they stole the land a third time by having a war with Mexico. And in that war with Mexico, there was a great treaty that was signed, the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo. And in that treaty, the treaty said that we were supposed to get some of the land back. The indigenous people on whose lands were stolen were supposed to get some of the land back once America took the land. The United States government by that time was done with creating treaties with Native people. And they actually didn't give any land back. The first laws in California were about California Indian extermination. The United States, with California State, with the backing of the federal government, paid $1.4 million hunting Native people, $5 a head and 25 cents an ear. California history that people aren't told about. So that's quite literally why my ancestors went into hiding on ranches in Pleasanton until it was safe for us to come out again. It's only been in my lifetime that we've been able to talk about the persecution of our ancestors, but also the resiliency of us still being here. We still exist on our own lands. It's because of the prayers of my ancestors, their determination, their integrity, their resiliency to not disappear, that I'm able to stand here and talk about this horrific history that many people don't hear about. We're here talking today about ecology and spirituality. We cannot ground ourselves and forget or erase the history of what's happened on this land, because this land needs to be healed in a bunch of different ways. We cannot just plant trees and think that it's going to be okay, or a garden somewhere, or think that we can clean up the streets of Oakland and not think that underneath those things is pain that we also need to set right. So we can't do one without the other. I love this quote. Walking. This way, don't turn around. I'm listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You're the result of the love of thousands. This quote actually helps me get through the day sometimes. That I have to remember that on our own land that we have been erased. We have been pushed out. We have been forgotten. But so have all of you. We all stand on the backs of our ancestors. We are all here because our ancestors figured out some time ago how to survive in order for us to be in this room together today. So our ancestors hold us up. It's our belief system that I hold dear to my heart. That our ancestors prayed for us a long time ago so that we could be here in order to do the work that we are supposed to do today. Some years ago, I started working on protecting and preserving the sacred sites of my ancestors here in the Bay Area. And I believe that my ancestors talked in a few people's ears, way before I was thought of, way before my mom was born. This man named Nels Nelson in the Bay Area created this map. In 1909, he created a map about where our shellmounds were. And our shellmounds were these great monuments that my ancestors put together. That's where we buried our dead. And they're always found along where freshwater creeks meet the bay. And in 1909, Nels Nelson knew that there was so much development over 100 years ago happening in the bay, that these mounds would be destroyed and forgotten. So he created this map so that we could find them and go back to where we were supposed to pray. Nels Nelson was one of those people, for some reason, my ancestors had in their ear, because who cares? These Indians were pretty much disappeared anyway. And, people have to go forward. But he did this. And I'm thankful for that. We started doing work in the Bay Area around preserving and protecting our sacred sites. Back in 1999, when there was this other wave of gentrification, that happened in the Bay Area. Something called the internet was created. Remember that? Yeah. The internet was created, and people in the Bay Area started outbidding each other for houses and apartments. And there was this wave of people that moved out. At the same time, the city of Emeryville had this brownfield that they were going to clean up and put in, and to clean up. And what they decided to do was to create a mall on top of it. Where Emeryville Shopping Center is now is the largest of 425 Shellmounds that used to ring the entire Bay Area. We went there and we tried to stop the development from happening. We asked the city of Emeryville to clean up the brownfield, to allow it to be open space, allow Ohlone people one part of their land in order to talk about the history and resiliency of our people, to talk about along Temescal Creek, what it was like, to help us to clean it up, to talk to our children, and to have a place for our children and our grandchildren to go. And the city of Emeryville was broke and said no. But we'll continue to call it Shellmound Street. So on the corner of Shellmound Street and Ohlone Way, you'll find this little tiny mound that's about, I don't know, not that many feet high, that's supposed to represent thousands of my ancestral remains. Isn't that cute? 5 minutes. So we go there every year and we pray. So you guys are all welcome to come. This will be the 20th year. The day after Thanksgiving, the biggest shopping day of the year, we show up at Bay Street Mall with hundreds of people, bring cookies to share. We give out information, hold up signs, have prayers and songs on the corner of Shellmound Street and Ohlone Way from noon to 3 o'clock. We've been protecting our sacred sites ever since then. In Segorte in 2011, we took over a sacred site for 109 days. It was a mini Standing Rock right here in your own backyard. People brought camping supplies and firewood and brought prayers and stood with us to stop the bulldozers from destroying 2 shell mounds that were on the last 15 acres of open land on the Carquinez Strait. One of my ancestors' last stronghold. We were successful in some ways because they didn't destroy it so much. There was a cultural easement that was created between a federally recognized tribe, a park district, and a city, the first time in the whole country that it's ever happened. And it was because we held down that land. But it wasn't only Ohlone people, and it wasn't just Native people. It was people from all walks of life that created a village on the same land that my ancestors had lived for thousands of years, sharing food and prayer and ceremony, protecting what was sacred to us. And we went there. My friend Janelle LaRose, who is my co-founder of the work that I do at Indian People Organizing for Change and the Segorte Land Trust, talked about how we went there and thought that the land, we were saving the land, but the land actually saved us. We remembered what it was like to be a human being again, what it was like to sit down and eat food and share food with each other, what it was like to share prayers with each other, what it was like to check in with one another. We don't do that anymore. For about 6 months after we left that site, we all probably had a little bit of PTSD. Because when you come home to your apartment or to your house, and you shut your door, you don't know who your neighbor is. You don't talk to them and share food or prayer with them. You come into this different reality that was created for us. It's not how we as human beings are supposed to be on this land. We began to work 3 years ago on saving the West Berkeley Shellmound. My good friend Toby McLeod here is one of the helpers in doing that and pulling this work together. The West Berkeley Shellmound is the oldest of the 425 shell mounds that ring the Bay Area. It was the very first place my ancestors lived along the water. The very first place along Strawberry Creek in the Bay, where my ancestors created a village site, a cemetery, a ceremonial place, the very first place that children laughed along the bay was right here on 4th and University. What now looks like a parking lot, we have been trying to save from development. There was developers that had this idea, the top picture of what they would like to create there. Luxury apartments and new shopping. And we said no. And we kept them awake with allies and accomplices at landmarks commission meetings and zoning board meetings until 2:30 a.m., writing letters and campaigns and forcing them to consult with our tribe until the developer backed away, but not before creating a new design that would allow a new permit process that has no public commenting at all. SB 35 was passed a year ago, and they put in a plan to change it. And so we are now in a lawsuit with the city of Berkeley, not against them, but with them, against the owners of the land, asking that this land be protected, not just for us, but for everyone that lives in the Bay Area. All 4th graders have to learn about us. Wouldn't it be great if we created a space where Ohlone people could talk about not only the past, but the resiliency? Wouldn't it be great to see a mound there, this picture on the bottom, where we could daylight Strawberry Creek, where we could put a dance arbor there, where we could have this place where people could walk up to the top and see the bay like my ancestors might have seen a couple of years ago. Inside, imagine a theater where you could sit in the middle and you could see, hear, smell, and feel what it was like to be at a Shellmound 200 years ago. Imagine a place in Berkeley, in the Bay Area, where we could actually talk about change and give respect to the first people that were here and are still remaining. Relationship with our lands for thousands of years, and that we have a sacred duty to maintain that relationship for the benefit of our future generations. We are all talking about rematriation right now. We are talking about putting land back into indigenous stewardship. We are talking about taking away patriarchal ideologies. We are talking about putting land, having women stand in their rightful place. We know as women that men all over the world have held onto land as private property. We know that men all over the world have done things to our earth and to land. The raping of the land, the pulling of extractions, the burning and taking down of the trees, the killing of the animals. Whatever has happened to this earth has also happened to our bodies. Mm-hmm. In our traditional ceremonies, we're told at this point in this time that it is our time to stand as women, to take our rightful place. Not in front of men, but beside them. It's time because we have the songs for the waters and for the air and for the land and for the medicine. It is time because we are the holders of life. And that is what we were put here to do. We have a different relationship with this earth. And we have a different way of being. Women don't create war because we have to send our children, our sons out there and our daughters. It's time for us as women to do this work. And it's time for us also to give back these lands into indigenous stewardship so that we can begin to have those prayers and songs and dances back in our traditional territories. Things that have been taken away from this land for hundreds of years because of colonization. Our first piece of land was finally given to us, a 1/4 acre of land a few miles down the street, a half mile from my house. I live down on 106th Avenue in Eads, below the railroad tracks, between there and the freeway. One of the poorest neighborhoods in Oakland. Half a mile from my house, right there, cradled by the freeway and by LaShawn Creek, our traditional creek, sits a 1/4 acre of land that we were given back. About 1.5 years ago, we began to do the work to create the first arbor, one of our dance places, the first one in 250 years in our territory. We asked people to come out and volunteer, and I think that there were some folks from here. I think Annie brought some people out to our territory. My friend Janella created an arbor model. We have people coming out and helping us to, these logs that we took down 1 year ago, 10 of us went out to a forest. We prayed to these trees and asked them to give their lives so that they would be a part of this arbor that we're building. An arbor where my grandchildren will dance again, where we'll bring people from all walks of life to say prayers for this earth, alongside the creek that we had always been a part of. Right there where those people stand in a circle will be the arbor. We're growing medicine in Albany so that we can give that medicine away. We have a place in West Oakland where we're taking care of. And we're doing that because our future generations are here. We don't do this alone or isolated. We do this with everybody that now lives in our territory. We were given original instructions on how to be in reciprocity with this land. We want to be good hosts, but we need people to be good guests. We need people to come and do the work with us, the hard work of finding out what that is. When we really look at it, we need to topple capitalism. We need to change the entire systems that we live in. We need to go back to more of a village life system where we know who each other are and we take care of one another. We ask for support with the Segurite Land Trust, for folks to come out and do the work with us, to plant with us, to grow with us, to dance with us, to dream with us, to think about what it would be like to rematriate the land. Thank you.